Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of our Malicious Compliance. In today's episode. So, you want me to note when I leave earlier? Sure. Why didn't I use Amazon? This is why. Sure, we'll make sure all injuries are reported. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. So, you want me to note when I leave earlier? Sure. I used to be a game master in another life, and I worked in the very first escape rooms of our town. I had two employers, one of them an accountant, and they were pretty much into that, hey, let's not care about workers' rights, our employees are young, they won't realize or protest, mindset. Thing is, I had learned a thing or two about law thanks to my master's degree, and I'm French, so complaining is kinda a sport to me. I quickly became their nemesis, letting them, and my co-workers of course, know whenever they tried to ask us something illegal. They used to ask us to check in earlier than our official starting hour, 15 million earlier, precisely, just in case we had clients or to prepare the room for them if our first-time slot was taken. So we used to leave 15 million earlier when we had nothing left to do, as a way to balance things. They noticed that, and asked us quite formally to please note on our presence tables whenever we left earlier. So we said yeah, sure. And we started noting the times we left earlier. But life is balance, you know. So I started to also note the times I got in earlier, and convinced my two co-workers to do the same. At the end of the week, we easily had 1 or 2 hours more on our timetables than what we normally had to do. Of course our employers tried to talk us out of doing this, to which we innocently replied we thought they wanted us to give an accurate image of our working time, so we complied. Wasn't that the goal? In the end, they told us it was not necessary to check in early anymore if our first-time slot was not taken. A small loss for salary, a big win for pettiness. Why didn't I use Amazon? This is why. Not my story, but my wife's, who doesn't use Reddit. Obligatory background: my wife does procurement for a large US headquartered organization with branches in a lot of other countries. Her branch operates out of the Middle East. As you might imagine, when it comes to working for a large international organization, there are a lot of rules that she's obligated to follow when it comes to sourcing material, and there is a list of preferred sellers that the organization wants her to use if at all possible. Unsurprisingly, a lot of those sellers are also US-based. Which is fine most of the time, but can be really inconvenient in a lot of ways given the distances involved with where she's at. So, on occasion, she'll stray from the book and look more locally if she knows it's not going to cause a big issue and everyone will be happy in the end anyway. Usually she gets away with it because the powers that be understand why she does this. Usually. The story: recently, one newer department manager noticed that an order my wife had made on their behalf didn't come from the preferred seller that they'd been expecting to come through. In this case, Amazon. They chastised my wife for violating policy and insisted that, next time, she had to use Amazon for orders like this. Okay, fine. Yes, my wife was technically in the wrong, and a reprimand was technically the appropriate response, but my wife had a good reason for doing what she did. Which the manager in question found out next year when they put in their next order. You see, because of the distances involved and the large number of departments placing orders, we're talking about multi-ton containers being sent overseas by ship. It can take months for the departments to finally get what they ordered. Also, because of how the shipping and receiving is handled, Amazon is technically out of the loop from the moment the shipment is delivered to the freighter at the port that will be hauling it across the Atlantic. So, from Amazon's perspective, the order is considered delivered for the purposes of their return policy before the ship carrying the order even leaves the dock, and long before it ever arrives in the country my wife is based in. From there, it can then take many more weeks for the order to clear customs, be received by her organization, unpacked, sorted, and finally distributed to the various departments who had made the orders. It's fairly typical for this whole process to take about 90+ days to complete. Well past Amazon's 30-day return policy. Now, my wife's job is just to order whatever the various department heads tell her to and trust that they know what it is they're ordering. Of course, sometimes there are mistakes with the order. Either the department wrote down the wrong item, or the wrong size/quantity, or Amazon shipped the wrong thing. Mistakes happen. When you're dealing with a dozen departments ordering tens of thousands of pounds of stuff at one go, they're practically inevitable. Usually something like that is no big deal, until too much time has passed to return it to Amazon for a refund and your budget is all tapped out for the year, and you really needed that item that you didn't end up getting. Which is what happened this year. The department manager in question accidentally ordered the wrong thing, and when they asked about getting it replaced, my wife had to, respectfully, inform the manager that, since it was ordered through Amazon, and not something more local, hint hint, it couldn't be returned for a refund and there was no more money in their department's budget for additional orders that year. This story does have a happy ending though, as my wife was able to find another department in their organization who was actually in need of the misordered material and they performed a lateral budget transfer so that my wife could order what the manager actually needed, from a local supplier, winky face. Sure, we'll make sure all injuries are reported. My grandmother worked in a local factory for over 3 decades. This story took place in the 90s, when a young manager started who'd only just joined the company. One of her first orders of business was to ensure, quite arbitrarily, that specific clerical tasks related to minor injuries be taken care of. Every time, without fail. Her intention was that everything would warrant a nurse visit, as well as the completion of a form. There was no apparent reason, as my grandmother told me occasional moderate to severe injuries happened, but there were no notable lapses in reporting. It was a brewery/bottling plant, minor injuries were beyond common. My grandmother's work team was a lot of rotating staff, all of whom communicated freely with the shifts before and after. Most of whom had been there a long time, knew their shit, and knew the chaos that would erupt from genuinely following those ridiculous instructions. Cue mass malicious compliance. In the coming days, every single minor injury would be enthusiastically reported. Need a band-aid, or have a small splinter? No, you need a nurse visit and a form to complete. Whole plant lines ground to a halt. Staff overwhelmed the nurse's waiting room for every single injury, as demanded, even when the offending wound was a small scratch or tiny burn. Forms flew out the door even more quickly than minor first aid supplies, and it wasn't long before upper management reassessed the situation. It costs a lot of money to have repeated shutdowns because so many of your staff are sitting in a waiting room, I guess, because that process was removed as quickly as it appeared. The new manager didn't try to act too big for her britches anymore, as my grandmother would put it, and it was back to business as usual. I've always loved this story. In the telling, my grandmother imitates the men holding their fingers with small cuts, gushing about how mangled they are and how badly they need the nurse. My favorite, and I always love to laugh when I think of what the nurses must have thought for those days. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.